Well, it's a pleasure to be back at the Coptic Solidarity Conference again this year to discuss our work at the State Department to promote freedom of religion or belief in Egypt and around the world. I want to congratulate the acting president of Coptic Solidarity, Caroline, for this conference, and also the great work of Lindsay that she does every year to make sure this comes together. And we very much appreciate the role that the various delegations have added to our discussions at the State Department. Just as a top line takeaway message, preserving and protecting religious freedom is a key element of America's foreign policy and a top priority of the Trump administration. Protecting religious freedom, we know, is vital to ensuring peace, stability, and prosperity. And all people should be free to worship as they please, to build places of worship, to come together alone or in community with others, and to change faith, and to practice any faith or no religion at all. In furtherance of this effort, next month, the Secretary, Mr. Pompeo, will convene the second ministerial to advance religious freedom here in Washington, D.C. We're inviting over 100 countries to participate, and almost close to 1,000 members of civil society will attend, coming from activists, religious communities, and human rights groups. Our aim is to motivate action worldwide, truly build an alliance of values around the importance of respecting religious freedom for all. Many of the issues that the previous panel had rightly highlighted as challenges that we've experienced in assisting religious minorities, we're going to try to discuss when we've brought the world together. We will have, for the first time, an entire track on how to promote religious freedom while doing development and humanitarian work. We'll have, and this is a follow-up to a conference that we co-sponsored with Great Britain in November, focusing on these questions of having a greater sensitivity to the needs of religious minorities in a conflict and crisis setting. We'll also have a special session on cultural heritage preservation as we understand the important role of preserving historic places of worship, shrines, cemeteries, as protecting the fabric of ancient communities and protecting the connection to their ancestral homelands. We recently did a special training where we funded the Smithsonian Institute to go out to Iraq to work with religious minorities to do a hands-on training on how to equip them with the tools that they need to protect their sites of religious and cultural significance. We'll also have a session on how do we teach interfaith tolerance? How do we help prepare students and children to live in an increasingly diverse world? We had a very successful follow-up conference to the ministerial in Abu Dhabi back in February on this topic, and it's going to be a continuation. And I have to say I really welcome the themes of this year's conference: prospects for equality and a radicalized society. And we want you to know that protecting Copts and all faith groups at risk is a primary concern of the State Department. And I have to say, parenthetically, in the Office of International Religious Freedom where I work, we're very fortunate to have my colleague Warren Kofsky, who's been covering Egypt, I think, longer than anyone in the U.S. government. And much of what I'll be sharing today is based on his excellent research and dedication to fighting for religious freedom in Egypt. In Egypt, we have seen how extremists have intended to harm Christians, their churches, and their property. ISIS declared, as everyone probably knows, Christians their favorite prey and have carried out large-scale, multiple murderous attacks on Copts. The latest one on buses carrying Christian pilgrims to a monastery in Minya last year. So for these reasons and more, we will continue to call on the government of Egypt to protect its Christians and their churches. However, protection is not the same thing as equality. Equality means equal rights for all citizens, and so I think it's a very appropriate theme for your conference. In Egypt, where all have equal rights regardless of beliefs, and where all receive equal protection of law without any discrimination, this will be a stronger Egypt, an Egypt that's also a better strategic partner for the United States. Equality gives dignity and is deserved by everyone. It's not a gift to be given from the stronger to the weaker. So the United States calls for equality in Egypt and around the world. And this element of society, the other part of your theme this year. In Egypt, over the last few years, we have seen a decrease in governmental discrimination against religious actors, but societal discrimination and hostility persists. Now, of course, we know that Egypt is fortunate to have many programs and instances of Christians and Muslims working hand in hand to develop their communities and to put sectarian differences aside. It really shows the best of Egypt and its culture. At the same time, we continue to see clashes between Muslims and Christians erupting with too great a frequency. When the Coptic woman Suad Thabit was stripped naked and shamefully paraded in the streets of Karam village in Minya in 2016, we thought it was positive that President Sisi called for the perpetrators to be held accountable. But unfortunately, local villagers pressured her and her Muslim neighbor to withdraw their police reports, with the result being that prosecutors said they didn't have a case. We are happy to see, however, that authorities have taken up the case again last year, charging 4 people for attacking Ms. Thabit and 25 others for attacking both her home, and 6 other Christian homes. We really want to see the attackers brought to justice soon. Too much time has passed. And as we know, that same year in 2016, Egypt passed the church construction law, including important stipulations providing a process to legalize unlicensed churches and their support buildings. That law aimed to fix a process that was incredibly onerous and often led to no churches being legalized or renovated. In response, churches submitted over 5,000 applications for legalization. And unfortunately, over the last 2 years, after official inspections pursuant to the law have taken place, we've seen Muslim villagers in at least 30 villages, most of them in Upper Egypt, oppose that process and oppose it violently. That's happened, for example, in the villages of Beni Minin and Bweni Suef Governorate, and in Minyan's villages of Esbet Sultan and Dimshah Hashim. Sometimes calls to attack churches reportedly come from local mosques, such as in the village of Al-Dawar and Beharia in January of 2018, and the village of Manshiet Zafarana in Minya this past January. And this year, in Sohag, Muslim residents in the village of Naga al-Ghafir surrounded the Anbas Karas church and chanted hostile slogans against Copts who were there renovating the church, a renovation that had been approved through this new process. But setbacks to religious freedom don't emanate from society alone. They also come from elements of the local administration and security forces who are either turn a blind eye to attacks or arrest the victims. According to an Egyptian NGO, in the 2-year period following the September 26 passage of the church construction law, authorities shut 9 churches following protests by Muslim villagers, most of them in Upper Egypt. We saw this in Dimshah Hashim, where 4 Christian-owned homes were set on fire in connection with protests legalizing of the village church. Coptic Bishop Macarius told the press that police failed to take action despite warnings ahead of time from the villagers. And more recently, in Luxor this past August, a crowd of Muslims protested Christian worship in a church that was also in the process of legalization. And the government's response was to arrest 5 Christians. And they were charged with conducting illegal religious rituals in an unlicensed church. Now this, as you know, under the 2016 law, shouldn't happen. The law stipulates that churches are to be allowed to function while their applications are pending. So it seems that authorities in Luxor and elsewhere have been acting in contravention of the law. I also want to pause for a second and note our general concerns about restrictions on the freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and the press across Egypt, as well as concerns about restrictions on civil society, including the NGO law, and allegations of abuses by security forces. Secretary Pompeo in Cairo called for President Sisi to unleash the creative energy of Egypt's people to unfetter the economy and to promote a free and open exchange of ideas. So we will continue to highlight how respect for fundamental freedoms and rule of law can help build a prosperous economy and society. We'll continue to highlight how opportunities for nonviolent political dissent can actually help prevent insecurity and prevent political instability by allowing citizens to participate more in their government and have a stronger voice in their future. But back to the focus that's bringing us here together today. What can be done related to religious freedom in Egypt? It's clear that the continued use of so-called traditional reconciliation sessions to address incidents of sectarian attacks are completely inadequate and are a poor substitute for the rule of law. In these ad hoc sessions, the victims are typically pressured to drop charges and relinquish their rights. The perpetrators are also often exonerated, and the victims are deprived of justice. This phenomenon has led many to observe that the reconciliation session does not reconcile anything, but actually fosters impunity and furthers attacks. It's frankly not just, and it's not equal. In order to address these actions that are antithetical to President Sisi's own statements related to religious freedom and tolerance, the Egyptian government should respect the rule of law and hold accountable both the perpetrators of violence and those government officials, either administrative or security authorities, who close churches in contravention of the law or turn a blind eye to violence. Accountability is key. Accountability can address a climate of impunity. Holding those responsible for sectarian violence in courts will be a powerful way to dissuade future violence. And thus we must also see security forces doing more to protect affected Coptic communities to prevent revenge attacks. In a notable move last December, President Sisi created the Supreme Committee for Confronting Sectarian Incidents, a committee tasked with devising a strategy to prevent sectarian incidents, to address them as they occur, and to apply all the anti-discrimination and anti-hate laws on the books in carrying out these responsibilities. Barely 2 weeks later, a serious sectarian attack occurred, where a mob reportedly numbering close to 1,000 people attacked Coptic villagers in Manshiet Zafarana in Minya, demanding that the church be closed. According to reports by the Bishopric of Minya and other human rights groups, the police pacified the mob by shuttering the church. Bishop Macarius, who I have great respect for, said, quote, "This is not the first time a place used for worship by Copts in Minya is closed. The common factor among all closures, however, is that they were done to appease fundamentalists and extremists to the detriment of the Copts," end quote. Now, this Supreme Committee responded quickly in less than a week. It convened a meeting to look into the attack and the closure of the village's only church. The committee issued a strong statement condemning it and calling for enforcement of anti-discrimination, anti-hate laws. However, as good as that is, we're not aware of any reports that authorities have taken actions against the perpetrators per the recommendation of the Supreme Committee. In closing, the societal violence and acquiescence of authorities to mobs demands it contrasts starkly with the interfaith tolerance evident during Coptic Christmas at the opening of the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ. The cathedral that sits across from the Mosque of Al-Fatah al-Alim were commissioned and inaugurated by President Sisi to be symbols of coexistence and national unity. And in a welcome show of interfaith harmony, as everyone here knows, the Grand Imam spoke in the new cathedral, and Pope Tewodros commemorated the new mosque. This show of respect is important. This show of religious leaders meeting as equals is important. It sets an example. It educates wider society. And on the theme of education, we have welcomed the reforms of public school books that the Egyptian government is undertaking to promote tolerance. We firmly believe that teaching tolerance will be key in defeating a mindset of extremism. Children who are taught to live peacefully and respectfully with people different from themselves will be better prepared to successfully engage in an increasingly diverse 21st century. Likewise, we welcome the legalization of almost 900 unlicensed churches and support buildings so far out of the 5,000 applications. That's progress. And we also welcome the appointment in 2018 of 2 Coptic governors, including the first Coptic woman to hold the position. This is a step forward. But moving a society forwards towards equality for all will take time, something that we know here from our own experience in the United States. In an apparent recognition that President Sisi understands this, he had an interesting quote when he inaugurated the new cathedral. He said, quote, "This occasion represents a tree of love which we have planted together, but this tree still needs attention and care so that its fruit reaches from Egypt to the whole world," end quote. We welcome that sentiment, but it's going to take dedicated action by the president and his government at all levels of Egyptian society. And the United States will continue to work with, partner, and urge the government of Egypt to redouble its steps to nurture that fruit in and throughout Egypt. Thank you very much.